Hello, good morning everyone. Welcome to our webcast. It's all in your head. Today we are having very interesting topic to discuss, especially if you are an artist or in the creative sector. Maybe you are experiencing creative blockages. Dr. Swingle will discuss how art affects brain functioning and how the brain state of the artist affects creation. Before we get started, let me give you some information about Dr. Swingle. Dr. Swingle was titular full professor of psychology at the University of Ottawa prior to moving to Vancouver. Fellow of the Canadian Psychological Association, Dr. was lecturer in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, attending psychologist at McLean's Hospital in Boston, where he also was coordinator of the Clinical Psychophysiology Service. Dr. Swingle is registered psychologist in British Columbia, certified in biofeedback and neurotherapy. His newest book, Biofeedback for the Brain, was published by Rutgers University Press, and you can get the book at soundhealthproducts.com. You can also send us questions during this webcast. We will have two sections during this talk to answer your questions. Simply type your questions in the chat box on the control panel on the right side of your screen and send. Okay, I think we are ready to get started here. Good morning, Dr. Swingle.
Good morning. Good morning, folks. Today, as Rita said, we're going to be talking about art and the brain, but our fundamental focus, as always, is on issues associated with trying to increase optimal performance and creativity with artists. So we're going to be focusing on issues that affect creativity, neurological conditions that block creativity. Okay, the first one, and that will block creativity, of course, is depression. So we see an awful lot of folks coming in here with a variety of conditions that are defined as depression. We're going to be spending a little time today talking about some of those differences. We see a lot of situations in which people are treated for the wrong condition. One that we're going to see in particular is conditions that are associated with severe anxiety. And because the person can't function, it's presumed that they're depressed, and they're treated as though they have neurological markers for depression. Those are inevitably failures. The other issue associated with depression is very often it does not manifest as frank sadness. It manifests as lack of motivation, lack of interest in things, and that, of course, is absolutely deadly for an artist. If they don't have, as we say in the trade, fire in the belly, then their creativity is going to be severely, severely restricted. So depression is the number one issue that we tend to focus on when we get folks coming in with what we call artist block. Often they come in for other reasons, such as sleep disturbance, anxiety concerns, and so forth, and then it's revealed that they are in the artistic realm and they're experiencing difficulty with artistic creativity, production, and so forth. And it's not a trivial issue. When I was at Harvard Medical School at McLean Hospital, treated a number of individuals who were hospitalized for suicidal risk. And a couple of these folks were artists, and as the metaphor is they stared at a blank canvas for 2 years and then became suicidal. Excuse me. This is what depression, or one kind of depression, looks like if we look at a top view of brainwave activity. Now, if you look at the one on the extreme upper left, you can see that there's elevated slow frequency over on the left side of the brain. That's one of the markers for depression, and we tend to think of that as we call it, reactive depression. We have other kinds of markers that are associated with endogenous depression, that is a neurological predisposition, genetic predisposition. When we get slow frequency over on the left, either alpha and or theta, that's very similar to what Richard Davidson discovered when he found that if individuals become sad, that there's an increase of alpha activity, and by extension we found theta activity over in the left side of the brain, which means that you're getting left suppression, meaning that the right side of the brain is more active than the left, which is the cardinal marker for depressed mood state. In general, what we're looking for is the right side of the brain more active than the left? That is the marker for depressed mood state. Anxiety. And the anxiety pattern, there are several anxiety patterns. One is where there's a deficiency in the back of the brain. O1 is the back of the brain, the occipital region in the brain. And this is the ratio of the amplitude of slow frequency, theta, 3 to 7 cycles a second, divided by the amplitude of beta, 16 to 25 cycles a second. So roughly speaking, you want twice the amplitude of theta as beta. And in this case, you can see that there's a severe deficiency in the theta-beta ratio. So this individual has a predisposition to anxiety conditions, poor stress tolerance, usually sleep disturbance, can't find the switch to turn the brain off, often self-medicating behavior. Now, these clients are very often diagnosed as depressed simply because they can't function, and they feel sad or they feel hopeless because they can't function because of the anxiety condition. Treating these conditions with antidepressants is inevitably a precursor to a lifelong problem. So, looking at that same topographical map that we were looking at before, the one on the left is the marker for depression. The one on the extreme right is the one we were just looking at, and that is where there's a problem associated with the ratio of slow to fast activity in the back of the brain. And here you can see there's an excess of theta amplitude, that is the strength of beta in the back of the brain is elevated. So poor stress tolerance, anxiety, sleep quality problems, can't shut your brain off, mental chatter, and often self-medicating behavior like alcohol problems. So, and this is the culprit, or at least one of the culprits in the anxiety condition, in which we have a problem with the ratio, the amplitude of slow to fast frequency in the back of the brain. Problems with attention. Sometimes we find a situation in which an attention issue, what we would conventionally think of as one of our forms of an attention issue, actually is not detrimental to a visual artist. It is kind of like a daydreaming state. That's a generalization, but occasionally we'll find that. But usually those folks are not the ones that are sitting in our office. The ones that are sitting in our office are individuals who are having difficulty sustaining focus. And this is the cardinal marker for the traditional form of ADD, which I call common ADD, in which you have marked elevation of the amplitude of your slow frequencies. Generally speaking, we're looking at it right over the center strip in the brain, but in this case, you can see it's widely dispersed over the entire brain. There's another form of an attention problem, and this one is really problematic, and that is where you have the marked elevation of alpha amplitude in the front part of the brain, equally distributed usually between the right and the left prefrontal orbital cortex. So what you want to see is you want to see beta having the lowest amplitude, alpha having the next highest amplitude, theta having the highest amplitude. And here you can see there's a big bump right around the alpha frequencies. Individuals with this kind of ADD kind of marker are those that have problems with planning, organizing, sequencing, following through on things, and completing tasks. There's a tendency to be kind of flighty and just difficulty with organization. On the emotional side, when it's quite severe, we have issues associated with emotional dysregulation. And these individuals come in with all kinds of diagnoses, everything from bipolar disorder, the histrionic personality disorder, anxiety disorders, ADD, and you name it. Depends on their age, too. Younger clients with this condition typically carry different diagnoses from adults with this same condition. And this is the area of the brain associated with that. We have elevated alpha, excuse me, sitting right across the front part of the brain. Relationships. This is a situation in which I was suspicious of a problem with an interpersonal relationship. This is a young female. And here I'm seeing a situation where there's blunted alpha, and we'll go over this because trauma is the major issue in blunting creativity in an artist. Here we have a situation in which the alpha in the front part of the brain should be about 30% increase when you close your eyes relative to eyes open. And in the back of the brain, it should jump about 50% in amplitude. And here we have 24% and 5%. The second thing is there's a marker for reactive depression. Remember, this is the one we just looked at, where theta is considerably greater in the left side of the brain relative to the right, and there's an excess of alpha in the right side of the brain relative to the left. That's usually in an adult. That's often associated with problems the person is experiencing interpersonally. This is reactive depression, and this is a trauma marker. So I asked this young lady, is she having difficulty with a relationship, with her partner, boyfriend, husband? And she admitted that she was right in the thick of a very, very problematic, anxiety-laden, depressing breakup. And it certainly impacted her creativity. So in this case, we're looking at an issue associated with elevated alpha sitting over here, elevated theta sitting over here. So there's your reactive depression marker. There's your interpersonal difficulty marker, and deficiency in the back of the brain in terms of the alpha response, both at CZ and O1. Now, she also had another issue, and that is if we look right over the medial, that is the center part in the front of the brain, she's got a ratio here of very high frequency amplitude that's elevated, meaning that the area right under FZ, which is the anterior cingulate gyrus, is hyperactive. And that's the same area of the brain associated with obsessive compulsive disorder. So individuals that have elevated activity in that region often have situations in which they get something on their mind, they can't get it out. So here she's got depression, she's got interpersonal problems, she's got severe emotional stressors, and she can't get rid of it. It just keeps feeding on itself. The other major problem associated with creativity or productivity of any individual, optimal performance, is sleep quality problems, and there's nothing more devastating to a creative artist than deficient REM. That green line right in the center is the only REM sleep that this individual got. You should have about 2 hours of REM. This person had 19 minutes. Now, deep wave sleep, she seems to be okay, sitting at almost an hour. That's what we want, roughly 45 minutes to an hour of deep wave sleep. That's when the body heals and restores itself, muscle recuperation and so forth. But REM is when the brain takes care of itself, and it serves at two major functions. One is you do your own psychotherapy in REM sleep. That's where all the emotional content gets processed, and we're doing a lot of work with trauma individuals in which we improve the REM sleep so that they can process their own emotional traumas. The second thing that goes on there is creative insight. Dream structure, lucid dreaming, and so forth can be very, very productive in terms of feeding and manifesting and supporting creativity. And the third thing is that's when the brain does its filing. So everything you've learned during the day, everything you want to consolidate during the day, that's when the brain is filing it away in the various memory cells and structures. So this person is in serious trouble. And here's what the full map the full night spectrum looks like for this individual. And you can see there's a lot of wake periods. Those are the red ones. Here's the deep wave, the black bars. And as I said, it's in the early part of sleep. It's positioned well, and there's enough of it. The culprit here is deficient REM.
Thank you, Dr. Svengel. We are going to take our first Q&A break. We have a couple of questions here, and the first one relates to the section where you talk about depression. What are the markers for endogenous depression?
Endogenous depression is typically when you have elevated beta on the right prefrontal orbital cortex. And we tend to think of that as more likely to be associated with genetic predisposition or endogenous. From a neurotherapy perspective, it doesn't matter. The fact that it's genetic doesn't mean it's in concrete. We fix it no matter where it's from. But there are a lot of different ways you can get the imbalance in the frontal cortex. You can get it by slowing of the left. You can get it by arousal of the right. You can get it by a combination of both. So that's the beauty of doing the clinical cue assessment when a client walks in the door, so that you know precisely what kind of depression the individual is dealing with, and more importantly, where to go to fix it, and what kind of brainwave activity you have to modify to give this person some help.
Can depression ever help with creativity?
That's a debate that's been going on for centuries. And toward the end of the talk today, I'm going to be going over some of the work that's been done on the relationship of emotional and psychiatric disorders to creativity. There is a link. I have some of my artist clients who feel that when they go into depressed mood state, they don't really resist it because they find that the metaphors and themes they're using in their artwork change a bit, and they can kind of capture that and utilize their mood state in their creative process. There's one artist in particular that I'm thinking about, did a whole series of works on isolation. So this would be like a tiny house in a large landscape, kind of sitting there by itself, a boat in the open sea with storm clouds above it. I'm thinking of a couple of the ones that she showed me. an animal in a large pastoral scene, but only one, and kind of sitting there. It has a strange kind of composure to it. And of course, the isolated person is another common theme. A single window in a house that is the focus of the visual decay. I forget what you call it. It's not decay point, but you know, the visual point on in a photograph. A window with no one in it, or a window with a shadow of a person. You know, those kinds of metaphors. That when this person was in depressed mood state, she did a whole series of them. They were just striking. So one of the things that we focus on in our optimal performance division is you don't fix what ain't broken. So an individual may come in, an athlete is the best example of this, and you do a brain assessment on them and you see some anomalies in which there's a marked departure from normative functioning in certain areas, but that's who they are and that's why they are where they are. So you don't want to normalize that kind of behavior. Similarly, a depressed individual may be coming in for treatment of something else, or maybe coming in for optimal performance work. And there we want to be careful about making sure that we're not modifying mood states that the individual is dealing with in a very efficient fashion. You know, as one person has said, the colors on our palettes are really the emotions of our life. So you don't want to have everything in green, which is what the normative look is on a brain map.
And we'll take one more question before we move on. How much can the environment the person lives and works in affect their depression and or anxiety?
Oh, it's huge. Absolutely huge. There is an interaction between the neurology and the environment. So, for example, that anxiety case that we were just looking at, that individual would be very prone to the negative effect of an environment simply because of stress tolerance. So environment is huge.
Okay, and just to remind you folks, we are going to have one more Q&A break. So if you have more questions, send them over. Thank you, Dr. Swingle. Let's move on.
Okay. Emotional trauma. Okay. Now, there are two general classifications if you're looking at the psychiatric designations. There's post-traumatic stress disorder, and then there's what's usually now called non-epileptic seizure. We, in the old days, called it pseudo-seizure disorder. And that's a situation in which the individual's seizure-like behavior, which can be anything from fainting to full-blown what look like myoclonic seizures to fugue states, is not associated with any identifiable neurological condition. It's all emotional in nature. The effects, emotional health, cognitive, and creativity. And in terms of the treatment, what we don't want to do is blunt or sedate it. What we want to do is process it. So let's look at what trauma is all about. The markers for trauma are identified at locations CZ and in the occipital region in the brain. And what we're looking for is a blunting of what's called the alpha response. Now, this is what I consider to be a work of art. This is the spectral display of a nicely functioning brain. And what we're looking at here is the amplitude of brainwave activity. And it should follow a nice algorithm here of the faster the frequency, the lower the strength. So as we say, amplitude is inversely related to frequency. Low frequencies, high amplitude, high frequencies, low amplitude. And this is nice, healthy looking spectral analysis. And when you look at thousands of these, you can kind of see what doesn't look like a healthy brainwave just by the look of that spectrum. So there's your work of art. This is an alpha response. Now, what you're going to be looking at here is the same kind of spectral display of an individual who starts off with their eyes open, and then they close their eyes, and then they open their eyes again. And just watch what happens to the alpha densities, that is the alpha amplitudes, in the region of 8 to 12 cycles a second, right in this region down here. Okay, so, this doesn't look like a, this looks pretty good in terms of the inverse relationship between an amplitude and frequency. So here's the eyes open, and then eyes closed, there it goes. And you can see that increase in strength right around the 8 to 12 cycles a second mark. So there's your eyes closed condition. Eyes open should drop like a stone. Bingo. There it is. Okay. There's a nice healthy alpha response in a spectral display of an individual's that looks in pretty decent shape. If you look at a topo of this, this is what we showed you earlier. This is the eyes open, and if you look at eyes closed, there comes your alpha. So this is just a static representation of the averaging of and there's your eyes open, and then if you go to eyes closed, you can see the increase in the strength in the alpha in the occipital region in the brain. Okay. Now, we know what an alpha response should look like. Now, this is a trauma marker. This is an individual who has been exposed to a severe emotional stress, and we refer to that as the trauma marker. And what you're going to see is alpha has a problem emerging. It comes up, and it looks like somebody's pushing it down again. Now, the first thing that immediately comes to mind here is this doesn't quite look as healthy as the last one we've been looking about. It looks like a little bit of suppression of the slower frequencies down here relative to what we were just looking at. But our focus here is what happens in this region in terms of alpha when a person closes their eyes. Okay, so that's immediately observable when you're simply looking at what's been going on here in terms of this client when they were opening their eyes, that we're getting a blunting of that alpha response. Okay, what about an artist? Now, generally speaking, when we're looking at highly creative artists, we find what we call the artist signature. Now, the artist signature is a very strong alpha response, so that when these individuals close their eyes, we normals, common folks might have an alpha response at the center part of our brain of, say, maybe 40% or so increase in alpha when I close my eyes. An artist might be sitting at 150%. And we find this over and over and over again, that individuals who are artists, and this is we're throwing our net pretty wide. It includes architects and musicians and good fiction writers, and in addition to the visual artists, choreographers and so forth, good carpenters. So a lot of folks who really have that creative capability and very often show what we call the artist signature. You often see it in athletes too, by the way. Now, what happens if an artist that has a very strong native resident alpha response is exposed to a severe emotional stressor? This is what it looks like. There's a lot of alpha bouncing around there anyway. So, there's our artist. And when the individual closes their eyes, you're going to see that it just has trouble staying up. It looks like somebody keeps pushing it down. And there it is right there. And so that every time it comes up, it looks like it gets shoved back down again. It can't sustain strong amplitude. Very different from an artist without trauma. It would go to the top of the screen and it would just stay maxed out on that screen until the other opened again. So visually very obvious. And we find that in the raw numbers. This is the strength of alpha at CZ, where it's right on top of the head, and it's eyes open, eyes closed, and that circled 49, 4.9 is when the eyes were closed. You see it actually went negative. And then in the back of the brain, 01, here we're going 5.9, eyes open, 5.2, eyes open, 5.1, eyes closed. So no alpha response at all. Add that to the disparity here between the right side of the brain that has 6.9 amplitude, the average is 6.9 millivolts associated with beta activity on the right side of the brain versus 5.6 on the left. And the difference there is sitting at about 23%. We want it below 15. So there's a marker for depression and two markers for trauma. We can also see this in the front part of the brain. See, here's the blunting of the alpha, but in the front part of the brain, we're also seeing a blunting of alpha. Remember, it should be beta is the lowest. Alpha is the second highest amplitude of microvolts, and theta is the highest. Here we have a dip in alpha amplitude in the front part of the brain, F3 and F4. And that's a marker for hypervigilance, which we often see with individuals who have been exposed to trauma. So here's somebody asked about the environmental conditions associated with artist creativity. Here we have a very good example of the major effect of trauma on the creative areas of the brain and the ability of the brain to quiet and restore and refresh itself. So that has a huge impact on creative manifestation. So again, what we were looking at there is problems in the front part of the brain are markers for depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, and then the locations that we see the trauma markers. What I have termed the Whitney Houston syndrome, am I good enough? Now, many of you may remember a lot of the discussion when Whitney Houston died of an overdose at one of the festivals. And a lot came out that she never felt good enough. That comes with the territory of early childhood abuse. I don't know what her particular situation was, but one of the things we often see in trauma is that trauma has occurred at an early age. And if a child, for example, has been exposed to a violent, let's say a young child, 8 or 9 years of age, has a very violent father who beats the child, and the mother does not intervene. The child comes to the conclusion that they're deficient in some fashion. And we're outside the arena of words now. These are individuals who, at the core, their core emotional belief about themselves is deficiency. Self-loathing is not too strong a term to express the pain that these individuals go through. And they can't get a handle on it because it's outside, as I said, outside the arena of words. You can do an awful lot of counseling around this, trying to dig out every gory detail. It doesn't seem to be that helpful. Where we can really make inroads here is to do what we call trauma release, in which we deal with it neurologically and get the individual to the brain to release the alpha. The trauma is released. The individual processes the trauma. There, under those circumstances, some counseling can help a lot. Or you can do something like one of the bilateral stimulation procedures like EMDR, OEI, bilateral stimulation. My preference is experiential psychotherapy for this kind of thing, but it's extremely efficient, and sometimes we only need a few sessions to deal with sometimes pretty significant traumas. And this is the metaphorical sequence I like to suggest. In processing emotional challenge, trauma, feel it, share it, that is, talk to somebody about it. Doesn't have to be a psychotherapist. It can be your baba, as we used to say, your grandmother, or a good friend. Sleep on it. And remember, we were talking about REM sleep, how important REM is. Now, here's where REM is really important. If you're not getting REM sleep, you're not doing your own psychotherapy. So if this doesn't work, fix the neurology, go back to number one. So, right prefrontal orbital cortex, when it's hyperactive relative to the left, we're looking at depression. It can happen a lot of ways. It can be reactive or endogenous. Doesn't matter from our perspective. We address it, whatever its cause. Trauma, you find it up in this region and in the back of the brain. Those are your markers. That is, areas of markers. Then in the back of the brain, this is your stress tolerance areas. So anxiety, poor stress tolerance, addiction like alcoholism. And when you get in a situation of hyperactivity of this region in the brain, the left, that's another anxiety marker. And when there's hyperactivity anterior cingulate, which sits in here, that's where you get perseverative behavior. That is, you get something on your mind, you can't get it out. What about madness? Okay. This is from Lord Byron talking about an artist, yet he knew how to make madness beautiful. Okay. What I call the Vincent syndrome. I see a lot of artists in my practice, not only visual artists, but fiction writers, dancers, so forth. And one of the things I always put right on the table, that is, are they affected by what I call the Vincent syndrome? Translation: do you have to be crazy to be an artist? Now, you get all kinds of very humorous things growing out of this. That is, where individuals feel that they have to be a bit mad to be recognized as an artist, affect and dysfunctional behavior. They affect mood volatility, for example, and things of that nature. So once I get that squared away with them, that you don't have to be Vincent to be a great artist, then we can move on. Some of the work that's being done in this area is absolutely fascinating. This is the work of James Fallon at UCLA San Diego, I believe. And what he did was he used the same kind of analysis that we use for brain waves on pictures. So if you run a scanner across this, then you get a waveform coming out of this. And if it's really fuzzy, then you get a different waveform than if it's really sharp. Okay? You get an entirely different waveform. You see all of the, each start and stop of some image here. It's very clear. There's a lot of detail here, and that's what you're picking up. If you fuzz it up, and then the changes, excuse me, you don't have those very distinct, sharp changes. So that's what he looked at, the power spectrum, and this is the frequency and the amplitude, exactly what we do with a brainwave. Here's our buddy Monet, nice, smooth waveform, inversely related to amplitude. Doesn't that look like a beautiful brainwave? Okay, so here's depression. That is, these are artists now who are admit to being depressed when they painted a particular picture. And this is the picture we're analyzing now, not their brain. Schizophrenia. Now, these kinds of conditions have a little bit of perturbation in here. We don't know what, well, I shouldn't say we, James doesn't know what to make of that. But it's quite routine, according to him. Isn't that fascinating? So there's our schizophrenia. And remember, we're scanning the picture now, not the brain, of a schizophrenic who painted something. Fascinating stuff. Here's our buddy Vincent. Okay. And there's his last self-portrait, if you remember. And that's not clear here, but it has a very stark kind of look to it. Okay, so neurotherapy, what we want to do here is we want to quiet all of this, and then we want to treat, and then we want to optimize. That's the sequence of what we do. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here. All of you folks probably know how we do all of this. So we put a wire on the ear and an electrode up on the head. And what we're getting here is the difference between the electrical activity coming from the ear and the top of the head to filter out all of the body noise. So what we're getting is the actual brain wave. And when the brain's doing what we want it to do, icons move on the screen. And when the brain's not doing what we want it to do, it stops. So perfect for kids. And for adults, often we give them the actual data. And there are thermometer-like displays here so that they can exercise, learn how to exercise control over brainwave amplitude. Brain driving, which is my favorite procedure that I developed when I was at the Harvard Medical School. Basically, we're using classical conditioning here. When the brain does something that we want to encourage or discourage, then we apply what's called an unconditioned stimulus. And we can do that with lights, we can do it with sound, and we can do electrical stimulation of the body. Here we're stimulating what's called pericardium 6, an area on the wrist that's associated with, we find, elevating slow frequency. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's an area used for things like epilepsy and so forth. So if we want to be able to do tasking, that is, if we want an individual to paint or write or read or whatever, then we have them in these glasses that you can actually look through, and the lights are around the periphery. So we can apply the unconditioned stimulus, that is, to influence the brain while the individual is performing the task. Okay. This is really fascinating stuff, and we're all geared up to do this. So we do a full brain map. Now, this is the work of Zeki Samir Zeki. He's at UCLA. And what he's looking at here is the difference between art and beauty. So here's two thematically similar paintings. And here's what happens when we're dealing with an individual looking at what he called visual ugliness. So there's your amygdala. But this is very interesting. That's the sensory motor strip. Why does that light up? Well, Samir Zeki said that, maybe that's getting us ready to run away from ugliness. It's hard to know what that's really going on here. This makes sense, of course. Now, visual beauty. And there's your frontal part of the brain, the orbital frontal cortex, and this is the medial region of it, sitting right under there. Okay, and it's dose related apparently, and so that individuals who rate, the beauty of the whatever it is they're looking at here have elevated activity, and the less beautiful, the less elevated. Now, here's what we do. So, we do subcortical imaging, and it's done with the full cap that I showed you earlier. And these are images that will light up, and it's an active display. So it will light up in different colors on an ongoing basis, and we can treat areas that are associated with issues like, what is your reaction to something of beauty, for example? We can extend that. What's your reaction to a task that you are trying to accomplish? Now, this is in our optimal performance division. What is your block? If I show you a pen, let's say that you handwrite your fiction, and I hand you a pen, and whatever writing mechanism you use, what area of the brain starts to light up? And are those consistent with the creative process? For example, if we have you read something that you've done that you're really thrilled about, what's opening up? And what happens when you're working with a blocked piece of fiction? Are those same areas lighting up? So fascinating stuff here. This is just another take, a different kind of montage showing the areas that are lighting up in terms of, again, these subcortical images.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Swingle. Our second Q&A break. I really like this first question. I'm actually curious about the answer myself. Why, even when trauma is experienced in childhood, we do often not experience the worst of the resulting problems till our 50s or 60s?
There are several reasons for that. Again, a lot of this is just clinical observation. A lot of it has to do with just kind of wearing out. I see a lot of people in their 40s who have had the high frontal alpha form of ADD that went undiagnosed. These tend to be mostly women because that form of ADD was undiagnosed in women earlier on. Now, and the problem is they're very dysregulated, so they have problems with planning, organizing, sequencing, following through on things. But they're also emotionally dysregulated, so their careers are in shambles, their relationships are in shambles, they finally just become hopeless and they show up on my doorstep. Okay. Now, trauma can often be cumulative, so that we experience a trauma in early childhood, and a later trauma will trigger the emotion and becomes synergic in a negative sense with the early emotional traumatic experience. The other thing that we often find is that individuals who have earlier traumas have behaviors that set up conditions that are problematic, that tend to peak later in life. For example, I treated a lot of Holocaust survivors, but more importantly, children of Holocaust survivors, and they very often have more severe reactions than the actual survivor themselves. And what they've been exposed to is a parent that would become outraged, absolutely outraged, if they didn't finish an apple that they were eating, for example. And if you can think of that kind of thing accumulating. Now I'm talking about the father here, who is the guy that's getting outraged. The family becomes more and more dysfunctional because of his outrage, and that accumulates and manifests, and the early trauma manifests in this person when he's about 50 because of the trauma creating the social situation that is again, synergic in a negative sense and manifesting. So we've got a number of algorithms that we work with in terms of what will trigger and manifest a predisposition. Now, this is one of the reasons why we use clinical databases, not normative databases. A normative database, an individual who has a predisposition for depression, for example, that hasn't manifested is sitting in that normal database. If something triggered the depression, then he's sitting in my office and he's in the clinical database. That's why the clinical database is so much more accurate.
Can you learn how to be an artist?
I hope so. I'm 76 and I'm still struggling. I think so. I think that you just have to discover what your gift is. You know, there's a song that I play. I play piano very, very badly. And one of my theme songs, if you will, is My Funny Valentine. And that was written by an individual who had a lot of difficulties with self-esteem, for lack of a better metaphor. And what it does is it celebrates our inefficiencies and our deficiencies. And, you know, if you think of the words to that, My Funny Valentine, is your shape less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak? When you open it to speak, are you smart? Okay. But don't change a thing. Okay. So if you find what it is that you know, you're able to manifest, there's the old notion that anything done with brilliance is artistic. So yeah, I think we can teach. I think we have to find what it is we want to learn, though, and what it is that we may have some special facility for.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking at the time here, and I think, Dr. Swingle, we have to move on.
Okay. I'm giving excessively long answers today. Okay. This speaks to the last question. The Volkswagen Beetle has just overtaken the Ferrari in the last straightaway. Okay. And when folks come in for our optimal performance program, what we point out to them is what we do is facilitate what you bring to the table. It's not brain transplant. So, you know, I'm never going to be Van Gogh. There's no question in my mind about that. Okay. But I may find something that I'm really good at and that I really have a passion for, and I can learn and teach myself how to really manifest that. That's what optimal performance is all about. And this is expressed by T.S. Eliot when he was talking about the relationship between Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins. Wilkie Collins is the guy who wrote Moonstone, who many, you know, that classic mystery. And the comment was Wilkie learned as much as a man of talent can learn from a man of genius, Charles Dickens. So again, there are limits to how much we can do with what we're bringing to the table. The important thing is find out what you want to bring to the table. Quieting. There are canned programs to help with creativity and performance. This is alpha theta training. Basically, remember that one of the problems that people have is when they have a deficiency of slow frequency in the back of the brain. And one of the ways to quiet is to increase the slow frequency in the back of the brain, which is what they've done here. And this was at the Royal College of Music, in which they trained some individuals to increase their slow frequency in the back of the brain. And you can see performance improved 2 grade points relative to control. And there was no difference between these individuals when they started. And the same is true with dance. So when they increased the slow frequency amplitude in the back of the brain, you can see that there was about a 50% greater improvement in the dance performance relative to controls. Now, they both improve, of course, because they're in training. So there'd be, we obviously want to see improvement, even if we're not doing any alpha theta. But this is the improvement, the percent greater improvement with individuals that had neurotherapy. Brain driving is a very efficient way to do that. And here we are looking at the decrease in beta and the increase in theta using brain driving, in which we are driving up slow frequency in the back of the brain. We turn on lights that are at 7.83 cycles a second when the brain is moving in the right direction. And what we're doing is capturing and strengthening the slow frequency, and that's a huge increase in the alpha strength, the theta beta ratio in the back of the brain in just one session. We use a lot of harmonics. These are sounds that are at various frequencies embedded in filtered noise so that you don't actually hear the frequency, you only hear the noise. And we've done a lot of research on this, and these are products that the person takes home to give themselves treatments. This is what's called Omni, and this was the late Dr. Budzinski sent me this to show what it did for a particular client he had. And what it's doing is suppressing all of the slow frequency, and this is right on top of the head, increasing the efficient alpha. So the brain becomes much, much more efficient. Remember, we were talking about the ADD issue as a blocking condition associated with creativity. So that's just by listening at that harmonic. Let me move on here. This is Mozart, and this is again a sound, and what we're trying to do here is to see whether we can strengthen the alpha response, which is the creativity response. So here's the mean amplitude of alpha. Now, this is an artist, that's a very strong alpha response, but listening to the harmonic at there we go. Listening to the harmonic at let's see, at 43 decibels, increased it to 30, to an average of 30, where it was, if you remember, 26. So we got a nice increase there in the strength of alpha just by listening to this harmonic. So I have a lot of artists who have this playing in their studios while they're painting. And in one case, a fiction writer is using it. It also works for us common mortals who have lower alpha. So this is a weak alpha client. There's the amplitude of the alpha. And we look at the low amplitude sound, higher amplitude sound. So this one responds best at the loudest level. So we are very precise in our measurement of these things. There's no guesswork. It's not Like if you go into a physician and you're depressed, take 2 of these a day and call me in 3 weeks. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. Here we test it before we actually give it to you, so we know precisely what it's going to do. This is the work of an autistic child. Look at the social interaction here. Incredible. Looks like somebody's waiting to get out of that child. And this is, again, autistic child. Autistic child. This is Adam and Eve. There's God. And there they're looking at the Garden of Eden, and here somebody ate an apple. Wonder what's wrong with this guy. That's my feeble effort at being an artist. They're using a lot of this in art therapy. This is some of the work that's done at one of the military hospitals for our returning troops. Thank you.
Okay, my turn. A little bit of promo. Biofeedback for the Brain is the book written by Dr. Swingle, and it is a must-have if you are looking for information on neurotherapy. It is an excellent book describing how neurotherapy effectively treats many neurological conditions. And as I said, you can get the book at soundhealthproducts.com. Basic Neurotherapy, the Clinician's Guide. This is a manual for clinicians. It leads them through the procedures for evaluating and treating patients with a wide range of disorders. It is also available at soundhealthproducts.com. And as you can see, Swingle Clinic has many educational offerings. We have public lectures, webcasts, online classes, professional trainings, and workshops. Many of these opportunities can be found on our events page at www.swingleclinic.com. And Dr. Swingle also offers online training through Biofeedback Foundation of Europe. You can visit their website at www.bfe.org to see all the offerings of Dr. Swingle's webinars and online courses. And also, the professionals who complete the courses can get up to 42 hours continuing education. And Dr. Swingle's Clinical Q and Brain Driving Workshop is coming up in a couple weeks. It will be from June 21st to 23rd. This is the fundamental workshop, and we will continue with the advanced workshop in October. That will be from October 4th to October 6th. If you'd like to get more information about these workshops, please send me an email at rita@swingleclinic.com. Also, every second Friday of the month, we offer online grant rounds. These are web conference sessions of case reviews and discussion of treatment strategies. It is a great learning opportunity for professionals. And another workshop we have scheduled for this year is the Optimal Performance Workshop with Hiroko Demichelis. She's leading our Precision Neurometrics division. This is a 2-day workshop, and we will focus on methods of assessment of neurological and physiological aspects, and the participants can expect practical knowledge on how to use these assessments to develop protocols using EEG biofeedback, EMG, skin conductivity, peripheral temperature, heart rate variability, etc. It will be offered from September 7th to 8th. And this is public lecture that is coming up. It will be organized by Amica Center for Retirement Living. It will be on Friday, July 26th of this year, and it is at their location. If you are interested in attending, please contact Amica directly. Their phone number is 604-921-9181. And because we are having a great demand for public lectures, we are doing another one in fall. This one will be at the Vancouver Public Library on West Georgia Street on Wednesday, September 11th at 7 o'clock. Now, we got the biggest room available with 300 seats, but we are starting to fill them up. So if you are planning to attend, please let me know by email, or you can give us a call at 604-608-0444. And this is it, folks. We made it to the end. I really hope you enjoyed today's show, and we will be back on July 13th with Dr. Bradshaw, who will talk about one of the expanded services we offer here at the clinic, at Swingo Clinic, and that is career counseling. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.